You've stepped into Crimson Moon stories where love is dangerous, loyalty is tested, and fate always leaves a scar. I'm Noktula and I wrote this story just for you. Ready to feel everything? Let's begin.
The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the quiet hills of Crescent Valley Pack. But peace shattered when a guttural scream split the night. A patrol wolf howled, sharp, panicked. Alpha Dorian's body was found outside his territory line, throat torn clean, eyes wide in disbelief. He was the 10th Alpha in 4 months to die under the same mysterious clinical pattern. No rogue claimed responsibility. No pack war had been declared. Yet someone, somehow, was picking off alphas like prey. Inside a heavily secured conference chamber hundreds of miles away, Alpha Riven Vale leaned forward in his seat, his icy grey eyes narrowed at the glowing report hovering on the projector. Throat slit. Clean. Same precision. Same blood marking on the tree bark beside the body, said Alpha Maddox, pacing at the front. The killer wants us to know it's them. And now, he's coming for more. Riven finished, voice like steel. Maddox nodded grimly. 10 dead. From the West Highlands to the Eastern clans, another Alpha muttered. He leaves no scent, no trail. Riven stood, arms folded. That's because it's not a he. You're still assuming this is a rogue male. Could be a she-wolf, said Alpha Trina. Doesn't change the fact that no one knows who's next. No, Maddox said slowly, turning to the group. Someone does know. He tapped the screen again. A newsblog article popped up on the display. Alpha kill. Predicted again, 3rd week in a row. The byline read, Lyra Quinn, independent Omega journalist. Riven narrowed his eyes. What is this? She's predicted the time and method of the last 3 deaths. Sometimes to the minute, Maddox said. Either she's extremely lucky, or she knows something. An uncomfortable silence settled across the room. She's an Omega. How would she know? Alpha Trina asked, incredulous. That's what I want you to find out, Maddox said, looking straight at Riven. You're the most resourceful of us. If this assassin's real target is you, we don't have time to wait. Riven's jaw clenched. Where is she? He asked. Lyra Quinn didn't like visitors, especially not alphas. She lived in a rundown boarding house on the edge of neutral territory, tucked between 2 defunct mills and a dusty gas station. Her tiny apartment reeked of old paper, burnt coffee, and sleepless nights. She'd gotten used to the solitude, needed it really. When the knock came, she didn't answer at first, not until it came again. Harder. She opened the door a crack, eyes narrowing behind her glasses. I'm not giving interviews, she said flatly. I'm not here for an interview, came the gravel-edged reply. Riven Vale stood tall in her doorway. Every inch the Alpha. Broad shoulders, cold grey eyes, and a presence that pressed into her lungs like gravity. Lyra's spine stiffened. Then I'm definitely not interested. She moved to close the door, but his boot stopped it. I need answers, he said, and you're going to give them. Try demanding that from someone who doesn't write death predictions in her sleep, she snapped. He stared at her. I'm not the killer, she added quickly. In case you're wondering. You predicted 3 assassinations. I reported coincidences. You used the exact time, exact place. Her jaw worked. I don't owe you an explanation. You do if the next corpse is mine. That silenced her. For a moment, all Lyra could hear was her own heartbeat. Riven softened his tone. Just barely. Let me in. Just 5 minutes. Lyra sighed, stepped aside, and let the wolf enter her world. Lyra poured 2 cups of black coffee and sat across from Riven at a scratched kitchen table, littered with maps and case files. He scanned them wordlessly, taking in red threads, pins, notes, symbols he didn't recognize. You're obsessed, he said. She looked at him over her mug. I'm informed. You've been following Alpha deaths since the beginning. Lyra nodded. ever since the first in the West Highlands. I noticed patterns. You were the first to report. A connection between the victims. They were all part of the Northern Pact Council 5 years ago. Riven blinked. That was sealed information. Not to someone who knows where to dig. He studied her. Her confidence didn't come from arrogance. It came from certainty. But she wasn't smug. If anything, she seemed exhausted. You said I was next, he said quietly. I didn't say that. My pattern shows a high probability. He leaned closer. What makes me so special? Her fingers hesitated on the table, then gestured toward a dotted red circle. You're the last, surviving Alpha who signed the Unity Accord. His face tightened. I was barely involved in that meeting. I was the youngest Alpha at the time. Doesn't matter, Lyra said. You're on the list. Riven leaned back. And you're sure it's a list? I'm sure you should. Stop sleeping alone. News broke the next morning. Alpha Maddox, murdered. Same method, same message. Riven threw the tablet across the room, shattering it against the wall. Lyra flinched, arms crossed tightly over her chest. I spoke to him yesterday. Riven growled. This shouldn't have happened. You didn't believe me, Lyra said quietly. He turned sharply to her. Don't do that. Don't act like you wanted to be right. I didn't. But she had seen it coming, and the guilt in her voice said she'd hoped she was wrong. Now Riven's name was blinking red on her wall. He was your ally, Lyra said. Riven's voice was hoarse. He was my brother in arms. We rebuilt half the eastern border together after the war. Silence stretched between them. Where do we go from here? He finally asked. I don't know, she said. But I think I know who's next. He looked up. And you're coming with me, he said. Lyra froze. What? You're the only one who knows the patterns. If I'm being hunted, I'm not doing it alone. You don't even know me. I don't have to. I just know. You're my best shot. Lyra hesitated. Then she nodded. They left at dawn. Lyra travelled light, just her laptop, a folder of notes, and a weathered journal tucked under her coat. Riven drove in silence, jaw clenched, eyes on the road like he could outrun fate. You've been Alpha since you were 19, Lyra said, breaking the silence. He glanced at her. You Googled me. I research everyone. It's a habit. You think that makes you better prepared? I think it keeps me alive. A beat. You've survived 10 murders, he muttered. What makes you so sure you're not on the killer's radar? She didn't answer. Instead, she opened her journal and slid a page toward him. It was a list of names. Every Alpha who had died. Their dates. Times. Method. Every death marked in red, and one name at the bottom. In black ink. Riven Vale. Pending. Riven stared at it for a long time. Then he looked at her. You're not scared of me, he said. No, she replied honestly. Why not? Lyra met his eyes. Because you're not the one doing the killing. The Northern Alpha Council's stronghold, nestled deep within the Iron Pine Mountains, had once been a symbol of unity. Now it reeked of death. Riven's boots echoed through. The grand hall as he stepped over shattered stone and blood-soaked tiles. The massive doors had been torn from their hinges, and 5 Alphas lay sprawled across the council chamber, their throats carved with brutal precision. This wasn't a warning, Riven muttered. It was an execution. Lyra followed, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch at the bodies. She never did. They were all on my second tier, she said softly. Riven turned. Second tier? Not directly involved in the Accord, but allies, supporters, enforcers. He stared at her. How do you have access to these classifications? I built them, she replied, voice tight. Using political records, private statements, whispers in pack logs, hidden archives. You sound like an investigator, not a journalist. She shrugged, eyes flickering over the carnage. Sometimes, the line blurs. Riven knelt beside Alpha Harker, an old rival he'd once nearly killed in a challenge duel. His lifeless face seemed oddly peaceful now. 10. More Alphas dead in less than a week. No one's safe, Riven said. Lyra glanced down at her phone. Someone just posted an anonymous image online. It's this room, this moment, seconds ago. Riven stood. They're watching. By nightfall, Riven and Lyra reached the Windmere Pack, the last neutral territory untouched by recent violence. The Alpha here, Darius Crane, was a silent man with salt and pepper hair and an aura of uneasy calm. He greeted Riven with a handshake, but looked at Lyra like she was poison. She predicted 3 deaths, Riven said, cutting off any hostility. She's here to help. Darius raised a brow. Or finish the job. Lyra rolled her eyes. If I were the killer, you'd already be on your knees. That earned a small smirk from Darius. You can stay, but she sleeps in the west guest wing, far side. That won't be necessary, Riven said flatly. She stays near me. Darius gave a slow nod, but said nothing more. That night, Lyra sat at the window in her guest room, typing notes into her encrypted drive while watching the tree line sway in the wind. Riven entered without knocking, closing the door behind him. You're not sleeping either, she said. He sat on the edge of the bed, eyes tired. Crane's hiding something. There are 3 new graves on the far edge of his border. Lyra stiffened. Alphas? I think so. They weren't reported. Exactly. She closed the laptop slowly. Then we're not safe here either. Riven glanced at her, then down. Your journal, he said. Let me see it. She hesitated, then handed it over. As he flipped through the pages, his brows furrowed deeper. You've been tracking this longer than you admit. She didn't deny it. Why didn't you go to the High Council? Lyra's voice was quiet. Because the High Council was the problem. The next morning, Windmere was burning. Riven woke to the stench of smoke and the blare of emergency sirens. Shouts rang through the pack compound. When he reached the outer walls, he saw it. Another Alpha, Darius's Beta, gutted and nailed to the front gates. Everyone out, now, Riven barked, ordering Windmere's guards to evacuate civilians. Lyra ran to his side, breath catching. That was meant to be Darius. No, it was meant to be me, Riven growled. He knew we were here. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed. In the trees. A bullet narrowly missed Lyra's head. Riven shoved her down, covering her body with his own. Sniper, he hissed. They're still here, Lyra gasped, crawling with him behind the overturned vehicle. Get to the tunnels, Crane yelled from across the courtyard. Lyra and Riven ducked into the emergency escape route carved through the mountainside. The walls were tight, the air thick. Lyra's breathing grew shallow. They're escalating, she whispered. No more warnings, no more messages. Riven turned on his flashlight. We're not just being hunted anymore. She looked at him. We're being herded. They emerged from the mountain tunnel miles away in old rogue territory once called Bloodshade Pass. Lyra stopped walking. Something's wrong, she said, eyes distant. This place? Riven asked. She nodded. I haven't been here since I was a child. Riven studied her face. What happened? She hesitated. There was a massacre. My old pack. Only a few of us survived. He didn't press. But when they reached the abandoned outpost, a black mark burned into the trees made them both freeze. A symbol. One Riven recognized. The blood code, he muttered. Lyra exhaled sharply. You know it. It was used by rogue factions during the Purge. Omegas used it to warn each other of danger. Her eyes flicked to him. You knew about the Purge? I know the Council tried to erase it. She knelt, tracing the symbol with her finger. Someone came here, recently. That night, they stayed hidden beneath the outpost's cellar. It was the first time Riven saw her cry. Silent, restrained, but undeniable. He said nothing. Instead, He stayed nearby, a silent sentinel in the dark. By the next morning, Lyra's eyes were dry. Her voice was calm again. "We need to go south," she said. "There's one Alpha left who helped fund the Unity Accord. He lives in exile now, off-grid." Riven stared at her. "You never said anything about an exile." "I didn't think he'd matter. But after what we saw in Windmere, I think he's next." They travelled through barren woods and abandoned towns, reaching a coastal bluff where an ancient stone manor overlooked the sea. An old Alpha named Varric greeted them at the door with suspicion, then surprise. "You're Riven Vale. Didn't expect to see your face again. You're hard to find." Varric looked past him. "And who's this?" "Lyra." "Quinn," she said, stepping forward. His eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should your name be on this," she replied, handing him her updated list. He looked down. His hands trembled slightly. "I made a mistake," he said softly. "Did you?" Lyra asked, voice cold. "That night someone tried to poison the water in the manor." Riven stopped the servant in time. Lyra found another message carved into the stone hearth. "Not even exile saves you." The killer was close, and Riven was running out of people to trust. Riven sat beside the fireplace in Varric's manor, watching the flames curl against the stone. The old Alpha had barely spoken since the attempt on his life. Lyra was in the study, scanning through the records she'd insisted on reviewing. "She's relentless," Varric muttered, sipping from the mug Riven had tested himself. "Digging through history like she's going to rewrite it." "She's doing more than any of us," Riven replied. "And right now, she's the only one I trust." Varric shot him a sideways glance. "Trusting an Omega? You've changed." Riven didn't dignify it with a response. When Lyra returned, she carried a yellowing stack of reports. "I found meeting transcripts from the first Unity Summit," she said, laying them down. "Most of those were destroyed," Riven said. "I found the backups, hidden in the fiscal logs under vague codes." She opened to a marked page. "Varric, you signed off on the funding to form the Accord's Internal Enforcement Squad." Varric nodded slowly. "We thought we were protecting the future. Rogue, packs were bleeding into neutral territory. No one expected what it would become." "They began culling Omegas," Lyra said flatly. Varric's jaw tightened. "It wasn't supposed to be like that." Riven stood. "Intentions don't erase blood." That night, Varric vanished. No signs of struggle, no broken locks. Just a trail of muddy footprints leading to the cliff. His body was never found. They drove south toward the inner territories, following rumors of another Alpha who'd disappeared weeks earlier but hadn't been reported. Alpha Penrose of the Hollow River Pack. As they crossed into neutral woods, Lyra tapped her phone. "There's a message," she murmured. "Encrypted. Came through the whisper line." Riven raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "A network of Omega whistleblowers. They share information anonymously, mostly about abuse and cover-ups inside packs. I helped set it up during my time at the Lunar Press." He glanced at her. "You trust them?" "I trust the data, not the people." The message contained a blurry image. Penrose's crest carved into the trunk of a tree. Beside it, a blood-stained stone bearing a familiar mark. "Same signature," Lyra said. "We're running out of time." They arrived at the Hollow River border and found it abandoned. No guards, no patrols. The pack had vanished. Riven and Lyra moved cautiously through the compound. Everything looked untouched. Meals on tables, clothes in closets. "This wasn't war," Riven said. "They were removed." Lyra opened a filing cabinet in Penrose's office and found a folder labeled Project Downriver. Inside were names, locations, birth dates. She read the first few aloud. "All Omegas." Riven took the folder and scanned it. "They were tracking them," he said, voice dark. "Relocating them. Quietly." He looked up. They weren't just killing Omegas. They were experimenting on them. Back in their makeshift camp, Lyra typed furiously into her laptop. while Riven stared at the fire. "You ever publish anything about the Accord before?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Pieces, exposés. I was dismissed from the Lunar Press when I got too close, labeled an Omega extremist. You don't strike me as extremist. Most journalists don't until they start asking the wrong questions." He chuckled humorlessly. "I should have seen it," he muttered. "All the signs, the secrecy, the cover-ups." Lyra looked over. "You were young, new to power. They used you." "That doesn't excuse it." "No, but it explains it." He met her gaze. "Why are you really doing this?" She paused, then replied, "Because no one else will." Later that night, Riven couldn't sleep. He wandered outside, the cold biting through his coat. He noticed Lyra's journal sitting on the stump beside her tent, left open to a sketched map. Something about the symbol in the margin gave him pause, shaped like a crescent around a dagger. He blinked, then closed the journal gently, respecting her privacy. Back inside, Lyra stirred. "I thought you gone. Just needed air," he said. She nodded. "We keep going tomorrow." "We don't stop until it ends." Their next destination was the Shadowpine Watchtower, an outpost turned refugee shelter. It was rumoured to house a surviving Alpha who had faked his death, Alpha Lyra. The forest surrounding the tower was dense and thick with fog. Riven kept one hand on the hilt of his blade as they approached. Inside the tower they found Lyra, alive, paranoid, and armed. "You brought her here," Lyra snapped, pointing at Lyra. "The one feeding the panic?" "She's not the problem," Riven said. "She's the only reason you're still breathing. I faked my death to avoid being hunted." "You were on the Council's security board," Lyra said. "Your protocols were used to eliminate dissidents." Lyra didn't deny it. "I gave them tools, not instructions." "Then who did give the instructions?" Riven demanded. Lyra hesitated, then pulled out an old communicator. "It came from someone inside the High Council. Someone higher than any of us." He slid it across the table. "There's a code in there. A backdoor message log." Lyra opened her laptop and began decrypting. But just as the message came through, the tower lights flickered, and a scream echoed from below. They rushed downstairs. Lyra was gone, throat slit, fresh blood still dripping onto the floorboards. "No one saw anything," a guard said, breathless. Riven turned to Lyra. "How?" She stared at the communicator. "Someone knew we were coming." They rode in silence for hours. The sun was setting by the time they reached an old bunker outside White Hollow. Riven parked the vehicle and leaned back against the hood. "We're losing ground," he said. Lyra leaned beside him, wind catching her hair. "We're getting closer. That's why it feels like pressure's rising." Riven glanced at her. "You don't flinch at bodies. You don't hesitate when you see death." "I've seen enough of it," she said simply. "I learned early not to look away." He nodded, understanding more than he let on. Inside the bunker, she set up her equipment and decrypted the log Lyra had left behind. "It's a list," she whispered, "of codes used to authorize strikes, disguised as supply orders." Riven scanned them. "My name's not here." "Because you were never part of the chain. You were a figurehead, a shield." He stepped back. "You said it yourself, Riven. You were used." A long silence stretched between them. Then Lyra turned the screen toward him. "One more name," she said. "One last Alpha still alive." "Who?" She hesitated. "Alpha Maddox." Riven's eyes went cold. "He died." Lyra shook her head. "That's what the report said, but his body was never verified. No funeral, no footage, no witnesses." He stared at the screen. "If he's alive, then he may be the one who started this." The coordinates Lyra decoded led them to the Frostline Ruins, a derelict outpost once used by Alpha Maddox's winter border patrol. If he was alive, this was the most logical place he'd go to disappear. Snow crunched beneath their boots as Riven and Lyra moved cautiously through the abandoned perimeter. The air was sharp with silence. too still. Riven scanned the tree line. There's no wildlife. Nothing's moved through here in days. That's never a good sign, Lyra muttered, pulling her coat tighter. They reached the main barracks. Inside, broken crates and rusted weapons littered the ground. But behind a locked steel door, Lyra found it. Fresh footprints, old generator oil, and a hot kettle. Someone's been here. Recently. Riven didn't hesitate. He slammed his shoulder into the door twice before it gave way. And there he was. Maddox. Very much alive. He stood with a rifle raised, grey in his beard now, but his eyes were still as calculating as ever. Riven, he said with a smirk, didn't expect you'd come looking for a dead man. You're supposed to be one. I needed the world to believe that. Lyra stepped forward. Why? Maddox looked at her with disdain. And who's this? She's with me, Riven said firmly. Maddox lowered the gun. Then I suggest you both sit, because this story doesn't have a happy ending. I didn't start the accord, Maddox began, pacing the bunker slowly, but I kept it alive when others lost the stomach for what it became. He turned to Lyra. You've seen the bodies, the old records. You know what we did. I know what was covered up, she replied. I didn't enjoy it, Maddox continued, but the rogue numbers were climbing. Packs were collapsing under the pressure. We needed order. And Omegas paid the price, she said coldly. Riven crossed his arms. Then why run? Because I saw what we created, Maddox admitted. Not just policies, monsters. The Alpha Council turned into something else. We weren't leaders, we were executioners. Silent ones. Who else survived? Riven asked. Maddox looked at him. Just 2 more. The rest are either dead or pretending to be. Lyra frowned. Do you know who's killing them? Maddox hesitated. No, but I know what they're using. He pulled out a thumb drive from his vest pocket and handed it to Lyra. That's the original targeting algorithm. Names, family lines, medical histories. The system was designed to identify unstable Omegas. But someone flipped it. Now it targets us. Lyra plugged it into her laptop, scanning the contents. There's hundreds of names here, she whispered. And most of the Alpha Council had access, Maddox added. Riven stepped forward. Why give us this now? Because I know I'm next, Maddox said. And I'd rather my death mean something. They left Maddox's hideout. The next morning. I won't follow you, Maddox said. But I'll keep moving. Do yourself a favor and stay off grid, Riven replied. Lyra remained quiet, her hands busy copying the algorithm data into a protected drive. Something in her shoulders looked heavier now, like the weight of information was starting to settle on her bones. They headed south toward an old resistance pack known as Redmoor Hollow, formerly exiled Omegas and outcast Betas who'd survived the early Accord years. As they drove, Riven glanced at Lyra. You all right? She nodded, not looking up. Just thinking. You said Maddox wasn't the one behind the killings. No. He was part of the system, not the sword. You sure of that? I've interviewed enough liars to know the difference. Riven didn't argue. When they arrived at Redmoor Hollow, the outpost was under attack. Fires burned across the northern wall, and wolves clashed in the shadows. Riven jumped from the vehicle, shifting halfway through the sprint, claws slashing into one of the attackers. Lyra grabbed her camera instinctively, but not to film. She documented the positions, the symbols on the enemy uniforms, the strategic layout. The attackers weren't rogues, they were professionals, trained, silent, precise, just like the killer. By the time the fire was out, a dozen were dead, including one of the last surviving council informants. Back at the safe house inside Redmoor's underground tunnels, Riven stitched a wound in his shoulder while Lyra organized her files. They're accelerating, she said. This wasn't just an attack, it was a cleanup. They're erasing anyone who can connect the dots. Riven winced as the thread pulled through skin. Lyra approached and knelt beside him. Let me finish that. He hesitated, then nodded. She worked quickly, quietly. Why do you keep doing this? He asked suddenly. Why not walk away? I told you, because no one else will. He looked at her. No, really. Why? You've risked everything. You've watched people die. You're not a soldier. She paused. I lost someone, she said quietly. Someone important. Someone no one else thought was worth remembering. Riven didn't press further. Instead, he said, I've lost people too, good ones. This war, it's not just about history, it's about who we let define it. She tied off the stitch, meeting his eyes. Then let's make sure we're the ones who write the ending. The data from Maddox's drive finally cracked open a connection neither of them expected. A third party. Someone had copied the targeting algorithm months ago, before the first alpha was killed. This encryption signature, it's old military, Lyra said, pulling up the metadata. This was done by someone who had access to former council hardware. Then we're not just dealing with a rogue vigilante, Riven replied. We're dealing with a ghost from inside the system. They traced the ping to a communications relay buried under a decommissioned training camp once used by Alpha cadres. When they reached the location, all they found was a bunker wired to explode. Lyra's instincts saved them. She saw the tripwire first, yanked Riven back just in time. The blast cratered the hill. Someone had known they were coming. They're watching us, Riven said grimly. Tracking our moves. Lyra didn't respond right away. Then she opened her phone. The Whisper network just went silent. She said, What do you mean? I mean all sources, all nodes. Gone. Riven clenched his jaw. We're being boxed in. He looked at her. Whoever this is, they're not just finishing the kill list. They're burning the ground behind them. The bunker blast forced Riven and Lyra to reroute through the Eastmoor range. With the Whisper network severed and the last known informant dead, leads were running dry. But the destroyed relay site had yielded one crucial thing. A data shard buried beneath the floor, charred but intact. Back at their temporary hideout, a safe house built into an abandoned railway junction, Lyra worked on decrypting it while Riven kept watch. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the clack of her keys. Then, I got something, Lyra breathed. Riven leaned over her shoulder. The screen displayed a partial voice recording, corrupted, but usable. A voice crackled through, male, desperate. They turned it on us. We thought we were protecting the Pax. Now they're using it to erase us. If you're hearing this, it means Maddox was right. It started with Protocol 7. Check the Hollow Archives. Who is that? Riven asked. Lyra shook her head. Unknown ID, but the voice sounds like Alpha Roan. He disappeared 6 months ago, presumed dead. I thought he died during the South Border collapse. So did everyone, Lyra said. But this recording is from 2 weeks ago. They exchanged a look. Another name scratched off the list, only to come back from the grave. Then we follow his lead, Riven said. We find the Hollow Archives. The Hollow Archives weren't listed on any map. Lyra only found the coordinates, buried in an old lawsuit involving a rogue claim against the Unity Accord. One she remembered reporting on 5 years earlier. The facility was buried beneath the ruins of Havenmoor Asylum, sealed off after a fire gutted the surface. They arrived at dusk, wind howling through broken glass and ash-stained stone. This place gives me chills, Lyra muttered, pulling her coat tighter. Riven drew his weapon and led the way. The basement. Stairs had partially collapsed, but a hidden elevator shaft had survived the fire. Inside, they descended into darkness until the doors opened to a room frozen in time. Paper files, metal shelves, rows of computers still running on backup generators. Lyra immediately got to work. Look for Protocol 7, she said. That's our keyword. Together, they uncovered a box labeled in red. Clearance. Alpha tier only inside were files documenting surveillance orders, suppression tactics, and behavioral studies. Most focused on Omegas considered unstable due to rebellion, independence, or trauma. Riven's face was stone. They used this to justify the purges. They didn't stop there, Lyra whispered. They used this to predict Omega offspring, potential future threats. It's eugenics. A sound echoed from the corridor. Boots. Riven shoved Lyra behind a server stack just as armed figures poured into the chamber. They were tracking us, he growled. They fought their way out. One attacker tried to grab Lyra. Riven snapped his neck. As they ran, the generator behind them exploded. Another dead end turned to ash. With nowhere safe left in the wilderness, Riven made a bold call. Head into the city. Darkfantasy was a neutral territory, a modern metropolis ruled not by packs but by politics and wealth. The killer wouldn't strike so openly in the public eye, or so they thought. Lyra checked them into a rundown motel under false identities. She spent the next day poring through digital copies of the Hollow Archives while Riven arranged a secret meeting with an old ally, Zane Wren, former war general turned information broker. They met him at a rooftop greenhouse overlooking the skyline. "You look like hell," Zane said. "You're not wrong," Riven muttered. "I need information. Anything about Protocol 7, surveillance, alpha targeting systems." Zane whistled low. "You're digging into some cursed ground, Riven. That project wasn't just about Omegas." "What do you mean?" Zane leaned closer. The final phase of Protocol 7 turned inward. It started identifying alphas who might go rogue, emotionally unstable, morally flexible. They were compiling an elimination list. Lyra stepped forward. "So someone took that list and started using it?" Zane nodded. "Only a handful of people had access. Most are dead, but there's one name I can give you. Cassian Drex, former chief of security under Maddox, disappeared before the first assassination." "Where?" Riven asked. "Last pinged in the Black Market district." Riven turned to Lyra. "Let's hunt him down." Navigating the Black Market district was like walking through fog filled with knives. Deals were made in shadows. Trust was currency, and both were in short supply. They tracked Cassian Drex through whispers and bribes, finally cornering him in a rusted-out train car turned gambling den. He looked older, thinner, but the same calculated glint still lived in his eyes. "I was wondering when someone would come," Cassian said as Riven and Lyra entered. "You know why we're here," Riven said. Cassian nodded. "Protocol 7, the kill list." "You helped write it," Lyra said. "I helped build the tool," he corrected. "But I never agreed to the executions." "Then who authorized it?" Cassian hesitated. "The orders came from someone above Maddox. I don't know who. The final phase was sealed off. Even I couldn't access it." "What about now?" Riven asked. "I burned my access codes years ago." He slid a crumpled card across the table. "But if you want to know who really controls the system, you'll need to find the architect." Lyra frowned. "That name's not in the files." "No, it wouldn't be," Cassian said, standing. "Because the architect doesn't exist on record. They're a ghost, but they left a trail, buried under the old tribunal records." Before they could ask more, a sniper round shattered the window. Cassian's body crumpled instantly. "Go!" Riven shouted, pulling Lyra down as bullets rained through the walls. Another lead gone. Another name crossed off. They barely escaped with their lives. By nightfall, Riven and Lyra were holed up in an underground shelter beneath an old bookstore on the city's edge. "You okay?" Riven asked. Lyra sat on the floor, breathing hard, a fresh cut on her cheek. "I'm alive," she said. "That's about as much as I can ask for right now." Riven cleaned the wound gently. Cassian was scared. Whatever this architect is, they're more dangerous than any of us guessed. Lyra powered up her laptop again. "He said tribunal records. That means the original council judiciary files. I remember a data leak 6 years ago. Someone tried to bury it, but fragments surfaced in old political blogs. She dug through online archives for hours, eyes flicking through line after line of redacted reports. Finally, she stopped. Here, she turned the screen toward Riven, a coded ledger of transfers, resources, security clearances, Omega detainment approvals, all funneled to a single anonymous user, alias ARCH, Architect, Riven muttered. Lyra leaned back. We're closer than ever, but her voice was shaky. Hey, he said, touching her hand. We're doing this. Together. She gave him a weak smile. Then let's finish what we started. They didn't know it yet, but the next name on the execution list was already being written. And this time, it was someone neither of them expected. Riven stared at the screen. Lyra had decrypted another section of the tribunal records overnight. On it was a new target. Someone who hadn't been named before. Someone no one expected. Alpha Riven Calyx. I'm on the list, he said flatly. Lyra didn't speak at first. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. It must have updated recently. The algorithm is still active. Who's feeding it data? She shook her head, still tracking that. But this confirms what we feared. Someone is refining the list in real time. It's not just a remnant of the past anymore. It's alive. Riven looked away, his expression unreadable. You need to go underground, Lyra added, quieter. Completely. Disappear. He turned toward her. I'm not running. You wouldn't survive the next hit. You've seen what they're capable of. I'm not afraid of dying, he said. I'm afraid of dying without stopping this. Lyra met his eyes. Then we find the architect. They went back through Cassian's old black market records, using the ARCH alias as a trace point. Lyra found a series of concealed relay transfers routed through the old Omega detainment zones, one of which was still active. This one's different, she said, pointing to the coordinates. No power records, no outgoing signals. But a supply drone pings it weekly. A hidden compound, Riven muttered. A perfect place for a ghost. The coordinates led them to Ashridge, a long-abandoned research facility nestled inside a mountain ravine, hidden beneath a collapsed bridge and dense forest. There were no signs of guards, no vehicles, not even birdsong. Riven crouched behind, an overgrown bush, scanning the main building through binoculars. Looks dead, he murmured. Lyra held up a motion scanner. There's something inside, deep underground. They entered through a side service shaft. The interior smelled of damp stone and old blood. As they descended through twisted corridors and rusted stairwells, Lyra spotted a faded mural on one of the walls. Painted symbols of unity, wolves interlocking in a circle. The Accords first. Logo, she whispered. Before the purges began, they reached a sublevel sealed by biometric lock. Riven forced it open using a broken vent system that led to the inner control room. Inside was a data hub still functioning, powered by a geothermal unit. Lyra tapped into the servers. This is it, she said. The source of the updated execution list. She downloaded everything onto an external drive. Then they heard a voice. You've come far. Both turned. A man in his 60s stood behind a desk. White hair, cold eyes, and a familiar face from the Accord archives. Councillor Reese. Theron, Riven said, stepping forward. Reese smiled thinly. The last survivor. Reese Theron gestured for them to sit. Neither moved. You're behind this, Riven said. All of it. Reese chuckled. I maintained it, yes. I didn't start the fire, but I kept the embers burning. Lyra stepped forward. Why? Reese glanced at her. Because wolves without order are beasts. The Accord was created to ensure structure, and when that structure began to crumble, we did what was necessary. Necessary? Riven growled. You murdered innocent alphas. You sanctioned the culling of omegas. And yet you're still alive, Reese replied calmly. Strange, isn't it? Lyra opened the data files. You've been using the Protocol 7 algorithm to pre-select targets based on subjective risk profiles. That's not order. That's tyranny. I'm not the only one who thought so, Rhys said. The architect was never one person. It was a failsafe. A program designed to carry out judgment even if we were gone. But someone's still feeding it, Lyra said. Rhys didn't respond. Riven stepped forward. Where are the others? Dead, Rhys said simply. Some by the system's hand, some by their own guilt. He pulled a small device from his pocket and placed it on the desk. I have no illusions about what's coming, but this holds the command key to shut it all down. Lyra reached for it. Then gunfire shattered the glass behind them. Sniper Rhys slumped over his desk, blood blooming across his chest. The system had claimed its creator. Riven pulled Lyra to cover as bullets tore through the compound's control room. It knows we're here, she shouted. The program, Riven called back. No, the person controlling it now. They fought their way out of the bunker, navigating collapsing stairwells and booby-trapped corridors. Once outside, Riven yanked Lyra into the forest. They didn't stop running until the sounds of drones disappeared behind them. They camped miles away in a hunter's lodge left behind by a forgotten pack. Lyra plugged in the drive she took from Rhys. It's encrypted, she said. He said it's the kill switch. Then we use it, Riven said. She looked at him. We don't know what else it could shut down. If it's tied to other systems, Omega databases, classified archives, this could erase every trace of what really happened. We'll back it up first, then wipe the network. They worked through the night. By dawn, the final firewall broke. On the screen, a single line of code blinked. Terminate Protocol 7. Y and Riven reached forward and pressed Y. The room went silent. They stared at the screen. System terminated. All active executions nullified. Riven exhaled for the first time in weeks. It's over. Lyra didn't speak for a long time. Then she said quietly, No, it's just beginning. With the system offline, the chaos slowed, but didn't stop. Pack leaders across the continent began reporting strange disappearances. A few alphas surfaced from hiding, confirming they'd been targeted and barely survived. But someone was still moving behind the scenes. One more name popped up on the final mirror server. Zane Wren. Riven called immediately. Zane didn't answer. They found him 2 days later in an old warehouse near the city border. Alive, but barely. He had been stabbed, his hands broken. Riven sat beside him while Lyra called for medical evac. Zane's voice rasped through a crushed throat. It wasn't just a system. Who? Riven asked. Zane's fingers twitched. He pointed at Lyra's satchel. The list. Then he went unconscious. Lyra opened the satchel and pulled out the decrypted drive. It had a new file she didn't recognize. Dated hours ago. A new execution list. Names updated. One last target remained. She handed it to Riven without comment. He read it. His face turned to stone. Who is it? Lyra asked. He didn't answer. But his hand closed around the drive like a fist, and in the distance, a wolf howled, alone and afraid. Riven stared at the drive. The final list only had one name. Alpha Riven Calyx. The list hadn't changed. No new names. Just his. Lyra hovered near the doorway, watching him. You said it updated? Riven nodded slowly. It did. But it's still just me. She frowned. That doesn't make sense. If the system is down, who's still maintaining? The list. I don't know, he said. But this isn't over. They spent the night tracking residual data logs from the fragmented server Rhys Theron had left behind. Lyra's skills at sorting the web of encrypted files were relentless. Hours passed, and still, the only thing she could confirm was that someone had access to the core of Protocol 7 even after they'd triggered the shutdown. Riven paced the room, his nerves fraying. Whoever's doing this is operating outside the system now. That means they've gone manual, Lyra muttered. Riven stopped. Then it's personal. She looked up. You think someone is specifically targeting you? I've lost everything, he said. My pack, my title, my home. But I survived. Maybe someone didn't want me to. He didn't say it out, loud. But the question hung between them. Was there someone left who still wanted him dead? They returned to Darkmoor under heavy disguises. Riven wore a civilian coat and dark glasses, his wolf presence suppressed so completely he almost felt human. Lyra walked 2 paces ahead, scanning for surveillance drones. They were looking for someone who knew the inside of Protocol 7, a ghost coder named Cinder, a former Omega prodigy who once worked for the Accord as a security analyst before going rogue. He operates out of the East Quadrant slums, Lyra said as they walked. Underground, through old subway tunnels. How? Do you know him? Riven asked. I did a story on systemic surveillance abuses 5 years ago. He gave me files, never showed his face. When they finally found the tunnel entrance, it was rigged with traps, pressure wires, pulse sensors. Riven disabled them carefully. This guy doesn't want company. They found Cinder in an old server room buried beneath layers of steel and cement. The room was hot, buzzing with outdated tech, but functional. He was gaunt, skin pale under flickering lights, and his eyes widened the moment he saw Lyra. You brought a wolf here? He's not your enemy, Lyra said calmly. And we need your help. Cinder eyed Riven. You're on the list. We know, Riven said. And I need to know who added my name manually. Cinder hesitated, then turned to his console. That depends on how much you want the truth. Cinder's hands flew across the console as strings of code poured across the screen. You weren't added through Protocol 7, he muttered. You were added through a shadow string. One that bypasses the original system. Lyra leaned in. Meaning, Cinder said. Someone copied the whole framework and made a duplicate. A clone system. One that isn't bound to the original shutdown. Riven's expression darkened. So when we thought we shut it down, you only shut down one of 2 engines, Cinder finished. There's a second one, smaller, deadlier, smarter. And who has access to it? Lyra asked. Cinder hesitated. That I can't say. The commands were masked through 4 separate ghost IPs. But the access key, it came from someone inside the Whisper network. Lyra froze. Riven didn't notice. What's the signature? Cinder turned the monitor. Look, the screen showed an old login ID, Echo 7. Whisper clearance. Level Red Riven frowned. I've seen that before. It was used by someone who leaked documents to the Hollow reports. Lyra's voice was quiet. I know. It was a deep source contributor. Never identified. Well, Cinder said, standing. You've found them now. Riven and Lyra left Cinder's bunker in silence. The streets of Darkmoor were busier than usual. The city's annual treaty march was underway. Shouting crowds, banners, loudspeakers echoing messages of peace between packs. It all felt hollow to Riven. They ducked into a side alley and took refuge in an old watchtower. Riven sat on the window, ledge, watching the streets. You knew Echo 7. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Yes, she finally said. But only through their messages. I never knew who they were. Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost? She turned her back to him. Because I spent years chasing that source. They always stayed one step ahead of me, gave me just enough to publish, but never more. Riven studied her closely. If you'd found them, would you have exposed them? Yes, she said quietly, because the truth matters. There was a knock on the metal door. Riven reached for his weapon, but it was only a courier. A message had been left for them. No signature, just a box. Inside, they found a shattered Omega collar and a note. Not all chains are visible. Lyra touched the broken collar gently, her expression unreadable. Riven didn't miss the faint tremble in her fingers. Cinder's warning came via encrypted message 3 nights later. The clone system has activated. The final target's execution is set within 48 hours. It's broadcasting through a hardline inside the Echo District. You need to get there. Now. They didn't wait. Riven and Lyra raced across the border to Echo District, a crumbling industrial sector long forgotten by the pack alliances. It had once been a containment zone for unregistered wolves. Now it was a graveyard. Every building had cameras. Every door had locks tied to old Accord infrastructure. This is where they're keeping the new core, Lyra said. Inside an abandoned steel mill they found it. A physical server unit, surrounded by motion sensors and armed drones. Riven disabled. The first two, then tore through the steel casing protecting the hardline. Lyra accessed the console. A single screen blinked. Executing. Final termination. Alpha Riven Galaxy TA. 12:47:29. She worked fast, typing line after line of override code. It's got triple encryption, she muttered. I can't break it in time. We need to destroy it, Riven said. Lyra didn't hesitate. She ripped the core from its mount and threw it into the mill's furnace. The system sparked, hissed, and died. The countdown froze at Wuraz 11:02. Riven sat down hard on the concrete. It's over, he said again. But Lyra didn't answer. She just stood there, staring into the flames. The old steel mill still smoked behind them as Riven and Lyra sat in the back of a stolen transport van, bruised and silent. Riven held the broken drive in his palm. The device was half melted, its core fried, but part of the data had been recovered, just enough to prove the system had been rebuilt after Protocol 7's shutdown. Someone didn't just copy the system, Lyra said, brushing ash from her jacket. They rebuilt it with intent. This was never about cleanup, it was about control. Riven nodded. And they almost succeeded. They drove into the hills, outside Darkfantasy, and spent the night at an old ranger outpost. It was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of quiet that felt borrowed. Lyra sat near the hearth, laptop open, digging through the salvaged logs. Riven watched her from across the room. What happens when this is all over? He asked suddenly. Lyra glanced up. You mean if we live? He nodded. I file the biggest damn story of my life, she said with a wry smile. And maybe sleep. For a week. You think that story will make a difference? She looked at him seriously now. It has to. Riven stared into the fire. You could walk away now. You've done enough. I didn't come this far to quit, she said. And neither did you. They headed next to a site Lyra uncovered in the logs. A remote forest clearing listed in an encrypted ledger, simply as Termination Zone C. What they found chilled them both. Mass graves, some marked, most not. Fresh ones. This wasn't the system, Riven muttered. This was someone's hand. Lyra took photos, tagging coordinates and filing names, where she could from scraps of ID cards. One grave was still open. Riven knelt beside it and stared at the earth. It's recent, he said. Less than 48 hours. Whoever's still doing this, they're moving fast. One marker had a name Lyra recognized. Counselor. Denavos. She had vanished from the public eye 3 months prior, her disappearance brushed off as extended travel. She was the one who voted against expanding Protocol 7, Lyra whispered. They're eliminating opposition. That night, Riven buried the open grave himself. We don't leave it like this, he said, voice low. No one else had buried these people. So they did. Back in Darkfantasy, Riven reached out to an old enforcer named Silas Greer, a retired alpha who had once served as a secret keeper during the Accord's height. They met at a shadowed speakeasy below a fake antiques shop. Silas looked older than Riven remembered. His beard was grey now, and he walked with a limp, but his eyes were still sharp. You shouldn't have come back, Silas muttered. I need answers, Riven said. About the list. About the architect. Silas took a long sip of his drink. The architect isn't a person. It's a seat, a rotating figurehead, Whoever controls the seat holds access to all clearance levels. And who holds it now? Silas didn't answer. Instead, he pushed a small coin across the table. Copper, with the old Accord insignia scratched out. That was given to the next architect 2 months ago, he said. But I never saw who received it, only the hand that took it. Pale. Scar. On the wrist. Lyra stiffened. So it was passed in secret? Silas nodded. The system died, but someone made sure the throne lived on. As they left the speakeasy, a message blinked across Lyra's phone. You're getting too close. Riven, read it over her shoulder. His jaw clenched. They're watching us. They returned to the ranger outpost to find it ransacked. The door was off its hinges. The files Lyra had printed were shredded. And spray-painted across the wall was one word in red. Liars. Riven moved fast, checking for tripwires or hidden cameras. Lyra swept the perimeter for digital pings. It's a warning, she said, but also a clue. She found it under a floorboard they hadn't touched before, a hidden metal capsule with one photo inside. It was a surveillance still, a blurry image of 2 people in the woods. One was unmistakably Riven. The other was a woman with her back turned. Who is that? Lyra asked. Riven took a long moment before answering. Her name was Mara, he said finally. She was a beta spy. Disappeared 3 years ago. We thought she was taken out by the Accord. Lyra raised an eyebrow. You think she's alive? She's the last person I saw before I went dark. If she survived, she knows something. They had to find her. But another text came in just then, this time from Cinder Riven. Lyra, the new list is back. 3 new names. You're still on it. And so is she. Cinder met them in an underground parking deck, sweat plastered to his brow, eyes bloodshot from staring at code for too long. I tracked the reboot through a parallel server, different location, but same structure, he said. There are only 3 names on the new list. He handed them a scrap of paper with the names written out in pen. Alpha Riven Calyx, Mara Thorne, Lyra Vance. Riven blinked. Lyra stared at her, name like it didn't belong. There has to be a mistake, she said. Cinder shook his head. The list never makes mistakes. It's generated based on threat criteria and exposure risk. I'm a journalist, she snapped. I haven't killed anyone. Cinder's voice went quiet. You don't have to. If the system identifies you as a disruptor of order, you're marked. Riven looked at her sharply. Have you been leaking anything new? No, she said. Nothing I haven't already shared with you. But her hands trembled slightly. Riven turned to Cinder. Where is the server located now? A data node under Silvercross Tower, he said. Corporate tech park. Heavy surveillance. You'll need to hit it from below. We'll go tonight, Riven said. Lyra stood silently beside him. For the first time since the beginning. She looked unsure. Silvercross Tower gleamed like a monolith against the night sky. Glass, steel, and shadows. Below it, the city pulsed with distant lights and oblivious lives. Riven and Lyra stood at the edge of an alley across the street, dressed in black, armed with data jammers and burner-comms. Cinder had mapped the path, entry through an underground tunnel that once served as a maintenance channel for the Accord's old power grid. The server room's beneath sub-level 5, Lyra said, checking her watch. Security clears out for shift change in 17 minutes. That's our window. Riven nodded. We get in, we pull the data, we burn the system, no mistakes. They crossed beneath traffic, slipping through a storm grate and descending into the lower sectors. The further down they went, the colder it got, like the building itself exhaled fear. They reached the hatch. Riven forced it open. Behind it, the clone server. It wasn't sleek or modern. It was raw, mechanical, a Frankenstein of old parts, blinking lights, humming wires, burning energy. Looks like a heart hooked to life support, Lyra muttered. Riven stepped forward. That's when the motion sensors activated. Doors slammed shut behind them. They were locked in, and someone else was already inside. A figure stood beside the core, female, tall, pale scars on her wrists. "Mara," Riven whispered. She turned slowly. "Hello, Riven." Her voice was calm, distant, like it belonged to someone already half dead. "I thought you were dead," he said. "I was, in every way that mattered." Lyra stepped forward cautiously. "You built this?" Mara smiled faintly. "I continued it. The real system died with Protocol 7, but the idea of justice, that doesn't die so easily." Riven stared at her. "So it was you sending out the list?" "I was just the hand," she said, "not the architect." "Then who is?" Mara didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the console and pressed a button. A new list displayed. Only one name remained. Lyra Vance. Riven turned to Lyra, confused. "What is this?" Mara looked at Lyra, not unkindly. "It's time." Then she stepped back and pulled a blade from her coat. Riven moved first, but Mara wasn't aiming at them. She drove the blade into her own chest. Riven caught Mara as she collapsed. Blood soaked her chest, her breathing ragged. "She was already dying," Lyra said quietly. "Poison on the blade." Mara smiled faintly. "She didn't want to do it herself." "She who?" Riven snapped. "Who's behind this?" Mara turned her gaze to Lyra. "I only followed the voice that gave the list, but I never saw her face. Not truly. Until I heard the questions she asked, until I read her words." Her eyes drifted shut. "I forgive you, sister." Riven froze. Lyra took a step back. "No," she whispered. He turned to her slowly. "Lyra, what is she talking about?" Her face was pale, unreadable. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said. He stared at her. "What the hell did you do?" She looked down at the console. "I ended monsters. I ended them before they could end more of us." Riven backed away as the words sank in. "You were behind it?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. She stepped forward and deactivated the core. "Everything went dark. I created the list," she said. "I designed the logic structure, the clone framework. Protocol 7 was corrupt, but I made it pure." You've been with me this entire time," he said, voice shaking. "I had to be," she replied. "You were the last name. The one I couldn't erase." "Because I'm your mate?" he asked, bitter. Lyra closed her eyes. "Because I loved you, before I knew what you were." He shook his head. "So every conversation, every moment, was it all a lie?" "No," she said, voice breaking. "You were the only thing I never planned." Riven was trembling now. "You used me to get close to the servers, to the truth." "I did what I had to do," she said. "The alphas on that list were responsible for genocide, for trafficking omegas, for secret wars no one ever punished." "And me?" he asked. "You covered it up," she whispered. "Even if you didn't start it." Riven stared at her like he didn't recognize her. "Then kill me." Lyra flinched. "I couldn't." "Because of the bond?" "No," she said. "Because I still believe you're capable of redemption." They burned the clone system. Together. The building collapsed behind them as fire consumed the last of Protocol 7's twisted legacy. They didn't speak as they watched it fall. Later, in the forests beyond Tarkmoor, Riven sat with a gun in his lap. The night was quiet. Lyra approached slowly. "No one will believe me," he said. "If I go to the council with this, they won't need to," she said. "I'm leaving." "Where?" "Somewhere they won't find me. Somewhere I can start over." Riven stared at the ground. "You know I should stop you." She smiled faintly. "You won't." "Why not?" "Because part of you still believes I did what needed to be done." He didn't argue. She walked away, and he let her. Behind them, the ashes of Silvercross scattered into the sky. No more lists, no more names, just silence and a secret that would stay buried until she chose to speak again.
They say Omegas were born to submit, to bow, to yield, to obey. But I wasn't born. I was made. In the dark. In the ruins of a pack compound where my sister bled out beside me, too broken to fight back and too innocent to understand what had happened to us. That's the day I died too. And someone else opened her eyes in my place. I never meant to become the thing I hunted. I was 16 when I realized no one was coming to save us. That justice wasn't written in laws or declared in council meetings. It was a lie carved into stone by the very alphas who created our cages. So I started collecting names. Not rumors. Not headlines. Evidence. Real. Verified. Buried by influence and polished by power. Alphas who had ordered mass purges in rogue zones. Alphas who trafficked Omegas across borders and erased the ones who fought back. Alphas who laughed as they signed off on sterilization programs for feral borns. I documented it all. And when the truth wasn't enough to stop them, I killed them. I didn't pull every trigger myself. Sometimes, I guided others, shadows desperate for a cause. Omegas with nothing left to lose. Or betas whose mates had vanished in detention camps. But the final decisions? Those were always mine. I studied the system. Learned its architecture. Then rewrote it under a false shell. A clone with no oversight. No borders. No mercy. I called it Echo. The Accord called it treason. But I called it balance. And then there was Riven. The alpha I couldn't kill. Not just because of the bond, though that was part of it. Fated mates are supposed to bring peace. He brought confusion. Guilt. A kind of unbearable stillness in the storm I'd spent years building. I watched him for months before I approached. I needed to understand if he was another wolf in polished armor, or something else. He surprised me. Not because he was kind. But because he was fractured. Just like me. Still, I kept the list running. Until his name came up. I tried to delete it. More than once. The system wouldn't let me. It wasn't personal. It was math. Risk calculation. Exposure percentage. His silence had cost lives even if his hands weren't soaked in blood. The program was never emotional. But I was. I delayed his execution 3 times. Tried to justify it. Tried to give him chances to break away, to fight back. And in the end, he did. But not in the way I expected. He stood by me even after everything. And that was the worst part. Because it made walking away feel like dying a second time. I don't know where I'll go now. The world isn't any safer. The council will rebuild. Another system will rise, draped in prettier lies. But I did what I had to. Not for justice. Not even for revenge. For the little girl in that compound who watched the only person she loved choke on silence. She deserved to be heard. And now she has been. I am Lyra Vance. Omega. Assassin. Architect. And I will not apologize for surviving.